Welcome back to Tales from the Enchanted Forest podcast with your hosts Fox and Sparrow.
Greetings, travelers. We're so glad to have you here in the Enchanted Forest. It's just gonna be another fun time, and this time we got like a part 2, which is something we don't do too often, so I'm very excited to hear like the rest of what's going to happen today.
Yes, and I'm very excited to touch upon the rest of the story because it was just such a long story that I didn't want to cut it off with just the descent into the underworld. I didn't want to just talk about how she stole the Mies or what happened with Gilgamesh. I kind of wanted to mix it all in together. But before we get to that, I wanted to talk about something that is very near and dear to this podcast, and that is the Internet Archive. Mm-hmm. For those of you who don't know, the Internet Archive is like an online library, and you can check out books. They have scans of books. You can use their Wayback Machine. They have archived blog posts, videos, pretty much anything you could find on the internet, you can find on the Internet Archive. And recently, it has been down. There's been a lot of activity that's been happening in terms of they've been getting attacked by stuff. They've been sued a couple times, I think. The legalities of it is very difficult. But we rely on the Internet Archive quite a lot as people who research old books and old versions of stories, original versions of stories, and just in general, books that are very hard to get access to, you can find on the Internet Archive, which kind of takes away the gatekeeping, I think, of academic and literature and doing your own research for a lot of stuff, because if we didn't have the Internet Archive, we probably couldn't find some of the sources we use to tell these stories. Mm-hmm. Specifically with this one, there were tons and tons of resources I had saved and I had bookmarked, and now that the Internet Archive is down, I couldn't find them. And that just reminded me how difficult it is in this day and age to get a hold of certain texts, specifically texts that help explain things or are foundational texts. And I mean, if you go on Amazon, some of these books cost like $200, $300. The team at Internet Archive is working extremely hard to get the website back up. Last I heard from Twitter or X, the teams were basically trying to get the site secure and safe as the number one priority, and the entire team has been working really hard with no days off. So just a shout out to the Internet Archive, and if it's something that you can support, highly recommend supporting it. The work they do is fantastic, and for people like us who rely on them, it's disheartening to see that they've been taken down. And we look forward to them coming back up.
Yeah. At the time of this recording, this is all currently happening. I hope when this episode comes out that they've been able to kind of get it back up, and that they're kind of confident in their security, and that the folks who kind of run are able to take some time off, because this must be super stressful. I mean, it's stressful for us. I can't imagine what's like running the website and everything. Like, that's a huge undertaking. So support them if you can. It's a really great resource.
So just a little shout out to them for all the hard work and for obviously making this podcast possible. But despite that, we have done our best to get the story out here. Previously on Tales from the Enchanted Forest, we have Inanna take the Mies from her father, the god Enki. These Mies each personify one aspect of the human condition, and in total she took 14 of them. Also, she had a run-in with Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who she takes revenge on by bringing the Bull of Heaven, who also happens to be her brother-in-law Gulgana, down to Uruk to wreak havoc. Unfortunately for her, Gilgamesh and Enkidu kill the bull. However, as retribution, the gods do send a sickness to Enkidu and he dies, which sends Gilgamesh on a different quest for eternal life. So we return to Inanna having the Mies, having run off the king Gilgamesh, and having nothing to do but descend into the underworld.
Dun dun dun.
Dun dun dun. The epic poem begins, "From the great above she opened her ear to the great below. From the great above the goddess opened her ear to the great below. From the great above Inanna opened her ear to the great below. My lady abandoned heaven and earth to descend to the underworld. Inanna abandoned heaven and earth to descend to the underworld." The great goddess gathered the 7 Mies and prepared herself for the journey down to her sister, Ereshkigal's kingdom, to observe the funeral rites of her brother-in-law, Gulgana. She placed the crown of the steep on her head, tied small lapis beads around her neck, wrapped the royal robe around her body, rubbed her eyes with the ointment, bound the breastplate around her chest, slipped the gold ring over her wrist, and finally shook the lapis measuring rod and line in her hand. After she was dressed, she turned to her divine attendant, Ninshubur, and told her of her plan to descend to the Kur, the underworld. If she did not return, she asked her faithful warrior to lament for her, beat the drums in the assembly places, and circle the houses of the gods. If she did not return, she instructed her loyal attendant to go to the temple of Enlil in Nippur, and if he did not aid her, to go to the temple of Inanna in Ur. Finally, if they did not help her, then her loyal attendant was to go to her father's temple in Eridu and beg Enki for help. Her father held the secrets of life, and surely he would not want his daughter, the holy priestess of heaven, to be put to death in the underworld. Ninshubur tried to plead with her mistress, but Inanna was steadfast, and so she sent off her vizier to wait for the news. When Inanna arrived at the outer gates of the underworld, she knocked loudly. She cried out in a fierce voice to open the gates. Neti, the gatekeeper of the Kur, appeared at the gates and looked down upon the great goddess in surprise. He asked why she had come to a place where no traveler returns from. Inanna replied that she had come to see her sister, Ereshkigal, and observe the funeral rites of her husband with her. Neti was hesitant and replied that they would need to consult with the queen first. Neti, the chief gatekeeper, entered the palace of the queen of the underworld and said, "My queen, the queen of heaven, of the place where the sun rises, a maid as tall as heaven, as wide as the earth, as strong as the foundations of the city wall, waits outside the palace gates. She has gathered together the 7 Mi and has taken them in her hands. She asks for admission to the land of no return." When Ereshkigal heard that her sister had come, the sister had caused the very death of her husband, she grew enraged. Slapping her thigh and biting her lip, Ereshkigal stewed angrily over what to do. How dare her sister come here, to her home, dressed in the 7 Mis which she had taken from their father? Ereshkigal looked down at her swollen belly and placed a hand gently over her unborn child. No, her child who is robbed of a father by Inanna. Her heart filled with hatred, Ereshkigal spoke at last. She instructed Neti to let her sister in, but to bolt the 7 gates of the underworld. As Inanna came through, a piece of her royal garments must be removed. "Let the holy priestess of heaven enter bowed low just like everyone else who enters the great below," she commanded of the gatekeeper. Neti heeded his queen and went back to the gates to allow Inanna to enter. As she did, however, the royal crown disappeared from her head. Inanna was bewildered, but Neti responded that the ways of the underworld were perfect and may not be questioned. This was the price to pay for entry. Inanna resolved to continue forth. 6 more times she crossed a gate, and each time an article was removed. Each time, Inanna asked what was happening, and each time Neti responded in the same manner. Finally, naked and bowed low, Inanna entered the throne room of her sister. As she started towards the throne, Ereshkigal rose, and the judges of the underworld, the Anuna, surrounded Inanna and passed judgment on her. Then Ereshkigal let loose all the hatred, vengeance, and loathing she held for her sister. She fastened her with the eye of death, spoke against her the word of wrath, uttered against her the cry of guilt, and struck her. Then she turned her into nothing more than a corpse, a piece of rotting meat to be hung from a hook on the wall for all to see. Her revenge for her husband was complete.
Wow, that was not complicated revenge. We're not going to wait for it. We're just going to go for... Also, she didn't go seeking it out. It was like once her sister came, she was like, "Excuse me? Okay, fine, let's do this."
It does show just the gall of it, right? You caused your brother-in-law to be killed based on a petty fight. And then you have the nerve to go down to your sister's kind of grieving place to her kingdom, dressed in the Mis that you stole. Well, stole air quotes, because she did technically get them from her father. He gave them to her.
She acquired through trickery.
Yes. It does seem very bold.
It's so bold, but at the same time, I'm now going, good thing you actually didn't bring all 14, because you were getting robbed of a bunch of them today, and you didn't even know it. Wow, I mean, I can't imagine what the sister's going through. Like, that has to be so brutal. And then to top it off, she's got a child. Oh, the poor kid.
Well, an unborn child that she's now going to have to raise all by herself.
Oh.
Definitely justifies it. And I think that's why I put the poems all together, and I wanted to tell the story all together, because just the descent doesn't quite make sense without the earlier story. So I'll recap something that so the next poem, things start to get a little bit dicey with the chronological order of things, but I think it made more sense to have the background of why she would do this to her sister. as opposed to just, oh, Inanna went down to hell and she got tortured and killed by her sister. Up above in Uruk, Ninshubar waited for 3 days and 3 nights for her mistress to return. When she did not appear, Ninshubar set up a lament for her by the runes, beat the drums for her in the assembled places, and circled the houses of the gods. First, she turned to the god Enlil, the highest god of the sky and earth. Ninshubar begged him to intervene, but Enlil replied that Inanna craved the great below. She who goes to the dark city must stay there. Which, fair enough. Next, she turned to Inanna, the god of the moon, but his response was the same as the others. Those who go to the underworld know the cost. Finally, the loyal attendant went to Eridu, to the temple of Enki, and she cried out for his help. Father Enki was troubled and grieved at once. He cried out for his daughter Inanna, queen of all the lands, holy priestess of heaven. From under his fingernail, Father Enki brought forth dirt and fashioned it into a pair of creatures neither male nor female. The Kurgara, which he gave the food of life, and the Galatur, which he gave the water of life. Enki instructed them to go down to the underworld. The cries of Ereshkigal could be heard from even his temple, and he knew his daughter was about to give birth. He told them to go to her and repeat her cries in sympathy. In return, she would offer them a gift, and when she does, they must ask her for the corpse of Inanna. Then they would sprinkle the corpse with the food of life and the water of life, and she will rise again. The Kurgara and the Galatur heeded Enki's words. They slipped through the crack of the gates and made it to the throne room where the queen of the underworld was laying on the ground, moaning and writhing in pain. As Ereshkigal cried out, the 2 creatures made sympathetic noises in response. This repeated for a while, and finally, in a moment of rest, the queen of the underworld looked upon the 2 interlopers and asked who the 2 of them were. If they were gods, she would bless them for their empathy. If they were mortals, she would give them a gift for their companionship. She first offered them the water gift, the river in its fullest. The 2 creatures responded in unison that they did not wish it. Next, she offered them the grain gift, the filled-in harvest. The 2 creatures responded in unison that they did not wish it. Growing frustrated, and literally in the middle of labor, Ereshkigal asked what they wanted. They answered, "We only wish for the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall."
I would be so offended, like, oh, thank you so much for helping me. Here's this item. Nah, I don't want that. It's like, I'm offering you a gift and you don't want the thing I'm offering. Okay, here's a second thing. No, I don't want that either. It's like, bro.
Please read the room. I'm about to give birth. Can you hurry it up?
Yeah, like, I am putting things on the table and this is just giving you freely. Like, you don't get to decide.
I think she was too distracted. She had bigger things on her mind to worry about the,
Fair. That's a very fair point.
Ereshkigal responded that the corpse belonged to Inanna. And they said, whether it belongs to our queen, whether it belongs to our king, that is what we wish. Tired and having enacted her revenge on her sister already, Ereshkigal gave in and gave them the corpse. The 2 creatures sprinkled her with the food of life and the waters of life, and soon Inanna's body restored itself back to its glorious form. With the 2 creatures by her side, Inanna set out to leave, but Ereshkigal and the judges of the underworld were quick to seize her again. No one left the underworld unmarked. If Inanna wished to leave, then she must provide someone in her place. Nodding her understanding, Inanna was permitted to leave through the 7 gates, and as she did, she regained her Mies. The Gala, the demons of the underworld, stuck to her side as she ascended. They looked like long, shadowy reeds, and the Gala in front of Inanna carried a scepter, while the one behind her carried a mace. As they left the final gate of the underworld, Inanna spotted Ninshubar, dressed in a soiled sackcloth and weeping for her mistress. When the loyal attendant saw her lady, she threw herself in the dust at Inanna's feet. The Gala moved to seize the divine attendant. "Walk on, Inanna," they cried. "We shall take her in your place." However, before they could, Inanna cried out and stopped them. She repeated all the great deeds that Ninshubar had done for her, and more. It was because of her loyal attendant that Inanna was whole and free, so she would never give Ninshubar to them.
Aww.
The procession moved on and walked to the city of Umma, where Inanna's son Shara was weeping at her shrine, dressed in a soiled sackcloth. When he saw them, he threw himself at his mother's feet in relief. The Gala went to seize him, but Inanna cried out that she would never give them her son, not the son that sang hymns to her, brushed her hair, and cut her nails. I would like to make a little note here that in some versions, it's not her son, but actually her like beautician that they come to take. Because it does seem a bit weird that they're like, oh, we're here to take your son. She's like, not this one. He cuts my hair.
I mean, I don't know a lot of sons who do that, but that's cool for you. I'm happy for your relationship.
Well, he's probably really glad he did it. He's like, oh, I hate brushing my mom's hair, but saved my life. So good for me.
Yeah, good for him. Oh, and I really love how she defended her assistant, and now she's defending her son. Like, oh yeah, like she actually has standards about who she's going to swap with.
I think it does come down to the fact that when she sees them, they're wearing the soiled sackcloth and they do throw themselves at her feet and they are mourning for her. It does really, like, when in death, you know who really cares about you.
I also just really love how the sister is like fine with her leaving. She's like, okay, I got my revenge. It's cool. And it doesn't, at least at the moment, it doesn't seem like she's immediately now is going to go back to her sister and unleash on her. It's like, okay, we've done this exchange. I'm going to leave now.
I think it just comes down to there are rules to the underworld. You can't really just leave. Even in Greek mythology and other kind of mythologies around the world, you go to the underworld. It's very much, by definition, not a place you can come back from. Yeah. So it does seem like she does respect that. And even the other gods, when they refuse to help, they made it clear she's choosing to go there. And if you choose to go there, you're choosing the risk of you can't come back. So that's completely on her. So the procession moved on to the next city, where Inanna's son Lulal was weeping at her shrine, dressed in a soiled sackcloth. He also threw himself at his mother's feet in relief when he saw her. The Gala went to seize him, but Inanna cried out that she could never give up her other son. He was a leader among men. He was both her right and left arms. A little exasperated, the procession moved to Uruk, where they heard the sound of a reed pipe coming from inside her shrine. Inanna's eyes narrowed, and she knew what they would find. By the big apple tree in the courtyard, the procession found Inanna's husband, the shepherd god, Dumuzi, sitting on his magnificent throne wearing his shining meat garments. Upon seeing her, he froze with his lips still pursed over his pipe. Inanna fastened Dumuzi with the eye of death and spoke against him with the word of wrath. The Gala seized him, pouring out the milk from his churns, breaking the reed pipes he'd been playing. They beat the husband of Inanna and gashed him with axes. Dumuzi let out a painful wail and cried up to the heavens to Inanna's brother, the god of justice, Utu. He begged and cried to be turned into a snake to escape the demons. Utu, hearing his brother-in-law crying, mercifully transformed Dumuzi into a snake. Now, this is where the descent of Inanna ends, and where for the longest time scholars were left with a cliffhanger. What happened to her husband? Luckily for us, 28 tablets and fragments were found dating back to about 1750 BC, and various scholars began translating and putting the pieces of the puzzle together as early as 1915. So now we have some semblance of a completed story. And actually, there are tons of different versions of this and variations of this. Dumuzi does not have a lot of happy stories. There are lots about his death, his dreams. There is a couple about him and his sister, and they're not all happy. So this is where we're going to take up the story of the death of Dumuzi.
It's funny that it's her husband that she's like selects and is kind of the one that becomes the next victim, because it's kind of also feels like her sister lost her husband, and it kind of feels like, you know, equal exchange at that point. If she's like, you can take my husband, you know?
Although it wasn't as easy as you can take my husband. It was very much, these are the people who mourned for me, and this guy is just playing his reed pipe, wearing his fancy clothes, doesn't even, shed a single tear that I'm missing, that I'm gone.
Like, get it together, man. Your wife just died, and she's like this important figure. Like, do you not think there might be some consequences to not properly mourning her?
Apparently not, because pretty much, I don't think anyone comes back from the underworld. So he was pretty set on the fact that his wife was dead, and he was just going to go around with, all the girls, because he was also a fertility god. So he had other things on his mind, I suppose.
Oh, okay. So he was like, oh no, bachelor life, whatever shall I do? Oh.
Just goes to show that even if you are, the goddess of heaven, the holy priestess of the world, you can't keep a man. Hera would have a thing or
Yeah.
two to say about that, about Zeus.
Oh my gosh. Do you think Hera and Inanna would just get along? Be like, oh my gosh, you would not believe my husband. This is what he did.
Yes, although I think Hera was actually kind of loyal to Zeus, whereas Inanna, we did start this story, this whole cycle, based on the fact that she was trying to sleep with Gilgamesh and he said no. So I don't think she has a lot of room to stand on. But at the very least, you'd expect your husband to mourn you, even if he was getting around.
Yeah.
So, this is the death of Dumuzi. Dumuzi, the shepherd god of Uruk, having escaped the Gala and his wife, turned to the field and hid in the trees. While sleeping one night, he had an awful premonition and dream. In this dream, rushes rose up all around him, and there were reeds standing before him. One reed stood all alone and bowed its head towards him. Of the reeds standing in pairs, one was removed. The trees kept growing fearsomely all around him, and his holy churn was removed. His shepherd's crook vanished, and water was poured over his holy hearth. A falcon held one of his lambs in its claws. His young goats dragged their lapis beads in the dust, and his sheep pawed the ground helplessly with bent limbs. When Dumuzi awoke, dazed and terrified, he immediately went to his sister, the goddess Inanna, to interpret his dreams. She was horrified as he recounted all that had happened and all that he saw. Piece by piece, she told her twin brother his fate. Rushes rising up around you means that outlaws will attack you. One reed standing alone means our mother who bore you will bow her head for you. Of the reed standing in pairs, one is removed, which means you and I will be separated. The reeds, Inanna mused, must also mean the Gala, those ferocious reed-like creatures from the underworld who had come to take him. She told him to hide and never return, which Dumuzi agreed to do. As he slipped out, he begged her not to tell the Gala where he had hidden, and his sister replied that if she did, then his wild dogs could come and devour her.
Foreshadowing, I bet.
I mean, him and his sister had a very interesting relationship.
Oh, really?
In the same way that Inanna and her twin brother had an interesting relationship, the line between incest and very close siblings appears to be quite fluid here.
Ew.
Yeah. So you could say they're a little bit closer than the average brother and sister.
Ugh. Okay. Well, interesting. Very okay. Wow.
So Dumuzi went into hiding, and the Gala did come looking for him. However, his sister kept her word, and no amount of threatening or bribing worked. They tortured her, but her love for her brother outweighed the pain, and she kept quiet. In some versions of the story, Dumuzi does return to the city and is immediately caught by the Gala, and he does this because he finds out that his sister was being tortured and returned to spare her. In other versions, it's quite unclear why he returns. Either way, the Gala beat him once more and bound him, ready to take him to the underworld. Dumuzi cried out once more to Utu and begged to be turned into a gazelle so he could escape. The god of justice heard Dumuzi's prayers again, and so, as a man of mercy, he showed him mercy. Dumuzi was transformed into a gazelle and escaped. However, the Gala were not to be outdone. They were creatures that neither ate, drank, slept, or tired. They pursued him relentlessly and caught up with him once more. This time, Dumuzi begged Utu to carry him to the house of the goddess Belili. Once there, he begged her for sanctuary, and she agreed to feed him. But he had barely begun to feast when the Gala appeared. They tormented him and beat him, thrashing him and gashing him, until Utu turned him into a gazelle again, and he escaped. With nowhere to go, Dumuzi returned to his sister's sheepfold, but it was too late. The Gala knew where to find him, and they entered the sheepfold one by one to strike Dumuzi. His shepherd's crook was removed, his holy churn is removed, his holy hearth was extinguished, and Dumuzi lived no more.
Dun dun dun.
After his death, the people of Sumer rose up in anguish. Without the young shepherd king, the fertility of the crops was left to the unknown. His mother mourned for him and lamented that her son was gone, his spirit had fled, and her heart would play the reed pipe of mourning forever. As for Inanna, she seemingly forgot her role in causing everything, and she became quite mournful as well. She lamented the fact that she could not perform the proper funeral rites for him. She could not wrap him in the shroud, bring him food or drink, or lay him to rest with all his possessions. As she cried, a fly appeared above her head and buzzed near her ear. It whispered that it knew where Dumuzi was, and it would take her to him. Inanna went with the fly to Dumuzi's mother and sister, and the 3 goddesses followed the fly to the steep, where they found Dumuzi's soul weeping. Geshana's grief was greater than both the mother and the wife when she saw her twin brother. She offered to go to the great below in his stead, but Dumuzi declined. Seeing the great love the 2 siblings had for each other, Inanna proposed an idea. She proposed that for half the year, Dumuzi would go to the underworld, and the earth would be barren and her marriage bed empty. When he rose back up, his sister would go down, and the world would return to fertility once more, in all senses of the word. Ereshkigal accepted this trade, and in the end, Inanna was off the hook, literally.
Yeah.
So this brings a close to the story of Inanna and her great descent into the great below, as well as our seasonal tale of why we have half the year of barrenness and half the year of fertility.
Wow, oh no, that's too bad, guys. I suppose you could do half the year so I could have my husband one half of the year and then, not have to worry about who else I want to be with the other half of the year. It's fine.
See, I found this really funny because I was like, she had 0 consequences for her actions. Sure, she was killed, and briefly, for 3 days and 3 nights, she was dead. But she came back, got all her stuff. She got to see who actually cared for her and who didn't. And in the end, she still gets her husband for half the year.
Yeah.
And the story of the poem, so when I was reading the translation, it talked about how the 2 twins didn't want to separate. And so her proposal was that they could have half and half. But I'm like, but in this way, they never get to see each other. So they technically are still separated.
It's like, that's probably a bonus for her, too. Like, yeah, don't have to.
She's like, oh, no, your sis just gone? The one you were sleeping with? Oh, no.
Oh, no. What will we do?
But this is just another one of those seasonal myths, the descending myth, and Dumuzi highlights the rising and falling god. So the same way that the Oak King and the Holly King could be seen as 2 sides of the same coin, where one needs to die for the other to rise. Dumuzi and his sister, one needs to go to the underworld in order for death and chaos to come to the world, and then when he rises back up, he brings back spring and summer, and all of the agriculture comes back. So in a way, it's the rising and falling of the seasons, it's the rising and falling god, it's the descent into the underworld that we have with Persephone. And it's just always interesting how many different myths have their own variations of this. And I think Inanna's descent is a massive one. One thing you might have noticed as we were retelling the story is that there was a lot of repetition. Most things came in 3s, and there was a lot of repeating of the same words. And that's because this is a poem, right? So in the poem, in the original versions, they really do go into each and every time something happens. So when she's first going into the underworld, and she's going through the 7 gates, and an article of clothing is being taken off, every single time there's that repetition of the same exact speech, which we've just summarized. But that is about the story. The little note I had about the chronological order of things is that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when she's hitting on Gilgamesh, he does bring up her past lovers, and specifically, in some cases, he brings up Dumuzi and his death, which in our case doesn't quite make sense to put that at the end, because the reason why she goes to the underworld was for the funeral of her brother-in-law, which happened because of Gilgamesh's spurn, so it seemed like a cycle. And like we always say, there's never just one true story. These are all just various tales, various poems, same cast of characters, but it changes up and there's different ideas around them. There's different reasons for things. So this is just our version of this story put all together. So it makes sense for us.
I like it. It feels a bit different. Like we had the Oak King and the Holly King, which was kind of more a war of brothers. And then we've had Persephone, which is like a straight up kidnapping myth kind of thing. And the reason the seasons change is her mother. It's not even Persephone doing anything. She's kind of more of a MacGuffin in that story.
Yes, I think we touched upon this in that episode. But the actual story where we get the the story of Persephone and Hades, we get it from the hymn of Demeter. So it comes from a poem that was dedicated to her. And one thing we talked about when we did that story is this idea of the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And here in Inanna's story, you have that same characteristic. So Inanna does represent sexuality and love, but she wasn't a goddess of marriage. She wasn't a goddess that had anything to do with that kind of union. So she was very much the goddess of the maiden. Whereas in this very specific poem, we have Ereshkigal, who represents the mother. She's literally pregnant, and the crone, the one who, takes over the maiden and who withers her down and who makes her into death. So it's always interesting to see where we can find that contrast, the mother, maiden, and the crone. And that's something that I think the cult of Persephone, the cult of Demeter, it was very, very big for them as well. This idea that Persephone could be the triple goddess as well. This trope of the Persephone story, this Persephone retelling, comes up so often, or as we should say, the Inanna retelling, comes up so often. And one place where it is very, very popular is in literature. So I have a little game called Blurb or Bust.
Okay.
I want you to tell me if this is a real story about Hades and Persephone based on the blurb.
Okay, define real.
So if it's an actual book that was written.
Okay, an actual book that was written.
Well, because Hades and Persephone have a lot of retellings. It's very popular in a lot of different genres. You can even see it in Beauty and the Beast, where you have a beast kidnapping a maiden, and, she becomes his wife to find true love. In the A Court of Thorns and Roses series that I talk about quite often, you see that trope again where, the big bad steals the girl and then they fall in love. And that's just a trope that happens quite often in fantasy books nowadays, where you have the character who's supposed to be the bad guy, the enemy, they fall in love. But these are some stories that are actually supposed to be direct retellings of the tale. But out of the 5 blurbs I have, some of them are real stories and some of them are fake stories. And you have to tell me if you think this is a real book that someone wrote about Persephone and Hades.
And to clarify, is this including modern retellings, or is this just
these include a range? Some of these are you'll see once we get into it, they include a range of them.
Okay.
So are you ready to play blurb or bust? All
right, yep.
Okay, so we have our first blurb. After moving to New Athens, Persephone, the goddess of spring, hopes to lead an unassuming life disguised as a mortal journalist. Meanwhile, Hades, god of the dead, has built a gambling empire in the mortal world, and his favorite bets are rumored to be impossible. After a chance encounter with Hades, Persephone finds herself in a contract with the god of the dead, and terms are impossible. Persephone must create life in the underworld or lose her freedom forever. Is this a real blurb or is this a bust?
I mean, okay. New Athens. It feels like something that would definitely happen in a YA retelling or something like that. I don't know. I don't feel like this is hitting quite the same beats. They're making Persephone the goddess. Obviously, creative license, all that jazz. Persephone's not really the goddess of spring, is kind of we talked about with Demeter. I think this is a bust. I don't think this is a retelling. I don't think this is real.
This is a real blurb. This is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair.
Wow. Okay, then.
I really liked that Hades has a gambling empire. I was like, you know what? You go, Hades. You have your gambling empire.
But it's do you not have enough to do in the underworld? You're now starting a gambling empire.
Well, I think when I was researching this, there are so many books that do modern contemporary Hades and Persephone, where they are still gods, but they've come down to the modern world, kind of like Percy Jackson. Or if anyone's seen that new Netflix show that got canceled, Chaos, that one also has Greek gods, but they've come to the modern world and they live among mortals. But yes, that is a real one. Okay, are you ready for number 2?
Yes, hit me.
Perse has always wanted to be free of her controlling mother and wants to be a normal girl. However, one day while taking a shortcut home through the woods, she's kidnapped and dragged straight to the pits of hell. There, she uncovers the secret her mother has been keeping from her for her entire life. And as she comes to terms with her new powers and her mysterious kidnapper, Perse must also find a way to escape the underworld or be stuck there forever.
Okay, we're starting off strong here. Perse being the nickname for Persephone, which I think is very clever.
Looking at the name Persephone, there aren't a lot of different variations of it you could make.
I would just not try and shorten it. It's kind of one of those names where I'm like, it's not gonna work out well. But Perse, I guess, is fine. But I think this is a very relatable or like dynamic for some people. The idea of kind of being controlled kind of by your family and mother, and I think it goes along with the myth. So I think this is a blurb. I think this is a story that is actually a real thing.
All right, drum roll, please. This is a bust.
No! I'm not going to be good at this game.
It's okay. Okay, we have 3 more.
Okay.
So,
let's see if I can go 0 for 0. 0 for 5.
When Persephone Lancaster receives a marriage proposal from an ill-tempered duke, she refuses and then reconsiders. The obscene amount of money he's offering Persephone would save her family from ruin. With her characteristic optimism, she travels to the far reaches of Northumberland to wed the greatly feared stranger. Lodged deep in a thick forest infested with wild dogs, the Duke's castle is as cold and forbidding as the Duke himself, a man with terrible scars on his body and his soul. But the Duke's steely determination to protect his heart at all costs is challenged by his growing attachment to his lovely and gentle bride. Is this a blurb or a bust?
Originally, I was thinking bust, but I feel like they've given enough details, like unique pieces of information, that I'm like, okay, this could be real. But with wild dogs and a cold foreboding, I mean, the Duke of the North trope is such a standard staple that this could also be just swapping that up. This also, this could have been straight up taken from another story, and you just changed the first name to Persephone and left nothing else different, and it could have been fine.
It is very iconically Regency novel, where you have like the rakish duke, and then you have the maiden.
Yeah.
But is it a Hades and Persephone retelling? Blurb or bust?
Okay, I was really starting to think it was a blurb, but then when I just said that this could be a story and change the first name to be Persephone, I'm now wondering if it's a bust. But with that said, I've been wrong every time.
You're like, I'm going to go against my gut feeling.
So I'll go against what I'm now currently thinking it's a bust, so I'm going to say it's a blurb.
All right, drum roll please. It is a blurb. This is from Seeking Persephone by Sarah M. Eden. And it is a more Regency novel type of romance novel version of Hades and Persephone. All right. Now we're going into the realm of fantasy a little bit. For number 4, 3,000 years ago, humans were hunted by powerful races with wild magic until the treaty was formed. Now, for centuries, the elves have taken a young woman from Luella's village to be their human queen. To be chosen is seen as a mark of death by the townsfolk, a mark 19-year-old Luella is grateful to have escaped as a girl. Instead, she's dedicated her life to studying herbology and becomes the town's only healer. That is, until the elf king unexpectedly arrives for her. Is this a blurb or a bust?
It doesn't even say Hades or Persephone now. We are getting straight up. This is really stepping away from those like names. I wonder, I think some of these terms are just a little generic enough where I want to say this is a bust, and I'm going to stick with my gut this time. Which might be bad.
This is a blurb. But
No!
you are correct. This does have a lot of other elements in it. So I've read the series, and this does have a lot of just fae in general, because fae do kidnap people. They do take them. Elf kings are known, and elf queens as well, but they are known to take humans and trap them in the elf world. This one, however, does touch upon a lot of the same tropes as the Hades and Persephone myth, to the point where it is a good blend of them. But I would consider this a kind of retelling. So I would say this is a blurb. Okay. All right. Are you finally ready for the last one?
Okay, I think I got the pattern down now. I think I know what must be done.
Okay.
I really can't trust my gut, is just been proven so true.
In a realm where night reigns eternal, Diana, daughter of the moon goddess, longs to escape her sheltered life among the Luminae. However, drawn to the darkness she's been warned against, she encounters Adrian, the irresistible vampire lord whose allure is as dangerous as it is captivating. As their worlds collide, Diana is kidnapped and must navigate the treacherous line between forbidden desire and ancient loyalties. With the shadows closing in and a vampire civil war brewing, she holds the key to his salvation or his destruction. In a love that defies light and darkness, will she embrace the shadows or seek the dawn?
Okay, my gut instinct is that this is a blurb, that this is true. It's got a lot of interesting details. It's got a lot of, it's kind of still, I can still see some of the threads going on here with the Hades and Persephone. But with that said, I'm going to say it's a bust, because I think it's true.
You're like, my gut is wrong all the time. I will go with whatever
It is wrong. It's not been right so far every time I've trusted it. So I'm going to have to say it's a bust, but I genuinely think it's
You think
real.
This is a real story?
But I'm giving you the answer bust.
Okay, this is a bust. This is not a real story. This is made up. So, all right. So we had 5 different questions. You got the first one wrong, the second one wrong. The third one you got right, but it's because you went against your instincts. The fourth one you got wrong, and the fifth one, again, you got right, but only because you went against your gut instincts. So, what we have learned from this is that pretty much anything could be a Hades and Persephone retelling, as long as you have a bright, bubbly girl who gets kidnapped or ends up with the dark guy, which is pretty much all of romantic novels nowadays.
Yep.
But thank you so much for playing Blurb or Bust with me. I had a lot of fun making it.
I really liked that. That was really a fun way to do a game.
Well, I wanted to bring together kind of, because when we used to do the 5 Fantastic Finds, often the ones that I would talk about would be the retellings and the different kind of literary aspects to it. But I just feel like there's so many different stories out there, and they all kind of blend into one. So this was kind of my way of bringing kind of the footnotes with Fox aspect to it, but not doing it so I'm just telling you about all these different books. Instead, we're playing a game. And I do enjoy these games. I hope everyone else is also enjoying having these different games at the end to kind of mix it up, spice it up.
And will you link the books that were actually true onto the website?
Yes, and what I was going to do is I was going to do a variation of this on Twitter as well, but with different books, obviously. Same with Persephone and Hades retellings. So as soon as you listen to this episode, go check out our Twitter. There will be a similar game up on there as well.
I love that. We'll have to go check that out. And I think that's all the time we got for today. So thank you, travelers, so much for joining us for this this story and this game that we're playing. Hope you guys are all having a good November season, the normal season between the 2 holidays. And yeah.
And as always, if you want to see anything else, so the show notes, the summaries, and links to the other websites that we use to make this story, please check out all of that on our website, www.talesfromenchantforest.com. If you do want to hear more from us or play the Blurb or Bust game with us, then be sure to check us out on most social media websites. You can find us on @FromEnchanted or @Tales from Enchanted Forest. However, we do understand that some of you are a little bit old school like Sparrow, so you can email us at talesofenchantforest@gmail.com as well. We'd love to hear your questions, comments, and suggestions. So if you have anything to share, please don't hesitate, especially if you have any game ideas. Those would be fantastic. And remember, travelers, if you enjoyed what you heard here today and what we do here, then please give us a review on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts.
And remember, there's always a place for you in the Enchanted Forest.